So if we kindly may ask those of you who would like to participate in the session on effects on children and women, you can make your way down to Auditorium 3. We're trying to catch up on a little... You can't hear us. Okay. You guys, everyone, I hope you enjoy your coffee. We're trying to catch up on the delay from this morning. So for those of you who want to attend the session on effects on children and women, please make your way to Auditorium 3. It's about to start shortly. And for those of you joining the session on measurements, you may stay here. And for those of you heading down, you're welcome to bring your coffee, obviously. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good morning everyone. We're starting the session, so please, if you're going to the other session, be on your way. Otherwise, sit down and we need to start, please. Okay, thank you very much. So this morning, this session is going to be on measurement. We have 3 sessions, each paper 30-35 minutes. And if you thought you had enough of Turkey, think again, because we have 2 more papers on Turkey, both based on the phone data. And so the first paper is from Rana Comertpay. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your presence today. So it's a pleasure to present a joint work today so my name is Rana. I'm a PhD student at the University of Luxembourg. This is a joint work with Michel, Beine, Luisito, Bertinell, and Benteng from the University of Luxembourg, Jean-Francois Maystad from the University of Antwerp, and Anastasia, Litina from the University of Ioannina in Greece. So I'm going to explain you about the refugee mobility in Turkey using evidence from phone data. So before I go any further, let me provide you with some context. So why is it important to look at the mobility of refugees? Basically, predicting this latter is important for both operational and methodological reasons. For the former, it's important to understand because the mobility decisions of displaced populations may help relief operations to better target those in need of assistance. For methodological reasons, researchers investigating the consequences of forced displacement so far either assume that those people, those refugees, have little agency considering their location as quasi-random, or they kind of overlook a bit the dynamic nature of these decisions. So the determinants of refugee movements really, although studied, still in our viewpoint, remain important to study in the literature. As a matter of fact, this is a research question we will attempt to answer here. So in particular, the question we ask ourselves is what are the economic and non-economic determinants of refugee mobility in Turkey? So we will look at the period of 2017. So just wanted to present you with some facts that come from the UNHCR fact sheet in October 2017, just to give you an idea of what was the situation in Turkey. So this 70% almost of the refugees in Turkey at this moment are women and children. Turkey hosts the world's largest population in size, with over 3.5 million refugees. And more than 90% of those people actually live outside of camps in urban and peri-urban areas. So when we say mobility, really the refugees in Turkey could be anywhere. Actually, they are not just in the camps or in the provinces near camps. So what do we do in a few words? So basically, I think it's been now a year and a half, a bit more than a year and a half, around March 2018, there was a Data for Refugees challenge organized by previously state-owned, now private Turkish telecommunications company, Türk Telekom, in partnership with Boğaziçi University and TÜBİTAK, which is the Scientific Research Council. Basically, they organized this challenge and provided based on proposal submission, especially explicit data set of mobile phone records. So of refugees and non-refugees, basically. So what happens is that for 1 year, you have those individuals completely anonymized, which you can know if they are refugees or not. This is the only thing you can know about them. And then they are tracked. We know where they make their calls for 1 year, at which time, minutes, at the minutes level, and also at, it could be as fine as the antenna that registers the call. So we get access to this database by submitting our proposal, and basically what we do, we apply the standard gravity model to this database and attempt to provide an empirical estimation of the determinants of refugee mobility across provinces in Turkey. So we will look at provinces. There are 81 in Turkey. First, we look at the standard gravity model determinant. So for those of you who are not familiar, so basically we really will look at income, distances across provinces, and network effects. This is the part that we call the economic part of it. And then second, and more particularly, we merge this database with another one where we will explore the effect of certain news media, so certain categories of events that we look also at the province level. So, and then to benchmark our findings, we so far also estimated the very same for the case of non-refugees in the sample. So our contribution. So first, we contribute to an emerging literature exploiting phone data to characterize the mobility of displaced populations in emergency situations. And in particular, we will look at bilateral refugee mobility. And to our knowledge, we are the first one to use this highly disaggregated phone data in conjunction with the gravity model. Besides the standard results of gravity models, so income, distances, and so far, we show also that some events, especially asylum granting, humanitarian, and economic aid, are among the determinants of refugee mobility in Turkey. And finally, by aggregating the information that we have at the individual level to start with, at the province level, we've been also able to further enrich this phone data set with additional resources of information. Oops. So what I will do is I will first present our empirical model, and then from that point, for each of the variables that I use, I will go in each of the slides, and I will give you the database that we use to obtain the variable and how did we construct it. So, as I said, we are in the gravity model framework. So I have on one side standard gravity model variables that I will have, and then I will also have some event variables. And I look at the mobility on the left-hand side of Syrian refugees, so far, and then in the benchmark case, non-refugees in Turkey. So what you will see here on the right-hand side for the standard gravity model variables, the first two terms are the income levels at origin and destination. So in the gravity model context, you have to have your variables at the origin. This will constitute the push factors and the pull factors at the destination. Then you have the third term is distance, and then you have network effects. So you have the number of calls of non-refugees and refugees. And finally, at the second step, we will add the events at origin and destination. So the first term on the left-hand side, so the dependent variable, is actually a monthly mobility rate between origin and destination. So ODT, origin, destination, and that is time varying, of course. So what this means is, so we have the 12 months, but actually this is, so if you go from province A to province B from January to February, this is mobility considered in January, basically. So you have a monthly mobility rate, and the mobility rate, actually, we compute between months based on the migration rate, and this migration rate is actually the ratio between the levers, so the on the fourth point, the Nij over Nii, so these are the levers over the stayers in this province across the months. So what we do is we distinguish. So as I said, the data. So at the last on the last line, you see how the database is constructed. So you have caller ID, timestamp when the caller is made, and the district ID. We work at the province level because we don't want commuting patterns to show up. But when we say mobility, we really want the people to have moved from a province to another. Because if we take, there are many districts in Turkey, and if you look at that, and actually this is not really mobility, but this can be commuting. So in here, we go to a step further. From district, we go to a larger area, which is the province. So basically, from the caller ID, you can identify whether this call belongs to a refugee or not. So we make the distinction between the two. Then we take a 10 calls threshold per individual from a province to characterize this province as their residence location. And then all the other provinces become potential destinations, whether or not there has been flows between these two. So you also have lots of zeros in this equation. So it could be that province N and province D, there was no flows between the two, for instance. So this can happen. And because we want to make sure when we look at the origin, to characterize a province as the origin, we took night calls. So because during the day, people can make calls from their work location. So to alleviate these concerns. So far, at least we took calls from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., but we did robustness, so we did robustness on point 2. So instead of taking 10 calls, we also looked at 20 and 50 calls. Results do not change. And for the night calls, we also took 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 12 also a.m. to 6 a.m. We did a couple of different thresholds to see a little bit if this stays more or less the same. So I appreciate you don't see anything from this graph, but this is just to show you that so on the left-hand side, these are the origin provinces that came out from the very particular way we constructed the origin province, basically. And then these are the flows as from the data that we have. And on the right-hand side, you have the destination. So as I said, destinations are all the possible provinces. There are 81. And in here, one thing that comes out a bit is the green one is Istanbul, actually in the beginning on the right-hand side. But then again in here, you also expect, I mean, it also has to do with the population of each of the provinces. But this was to show you a little bit how the flows look like if we were to put them on a graph. And if you have any other visualization ideas or any feedback on how we can represent this better, I'm happy to take comments at the end on this. So let's now switch to our explanatory variables. So the first set are the standard gravity model variables. So as I said, we have income. So for the income, we need something so for the income, we need this to vary across months and for each of the provinces in 2017. So because we want time varying variables, we didn't look at the GDP at the province, because then we would have ended up with the GDP for each province in 2017, but then that wouldn't change from January to February, March, so far, so forth. So for this, we took a proxy. The proxy we took are the night lights, so these are cloud-free composites, so night light density for each of the province. Again, that doesn't change so much, but that still changed a bit from one month to another. So basically what happens is the monthly night light densities in our equation constitute our proxy for income. And what we do is for each of the province, we take the night lights at origin and destination. So income at origin and destination. For the networks, So we need networks as destination, as per the gravity model. We took the total number of monthly calls from refugees per antenna. So another database that was provided together with the challenge, it was called antenna traffic. So this database is very precise at the antenna level. So each of the antenna, you have information about the number of calls that were done each time from refugees, total and non-refugees. So what we did is we aggregated this after the antenna. We put all the antennas within the provinces, and we have the amount of calls that came from a province for each of the months. And finally, we have distance from origin to destination. So this is simply geodesic distances between pairs of provinces. And this is supposed to capture the practical difficulties to move for refugees. And for this, we use another database that also came from the same challenge. That was called base transceiver station location. So where you have the,
If someone moves within the city, would it be captured by the same antenna?
if someone moves,
Within the same city, so they don't move to another province, but they move around, perhaps they change flat. We heard that people moved apartments around North Lebanon, for instance. So I don't know if that's the case in Turkey, but so is there one antenna for a city, or if there's
no, there are. It is the universe of the antenna that we have. Yeah, it's the universe of antenna we have. So yeah, that would be captured. But then again, for this measure, for the networks at destination, this is not the individual level information. This is literally the calls that were registered by this antenna, say on 1st of January 2017. No. So I do this for the mobility measure. So the mobility measure is per individual. So there are several databases that we use from this challenge. So the one that helped me basically define the MODT here comes from a database that is called coarse grain mobility. So coarse because it's not at the antenna level. So the most precise information you have there is districts. So it's not as fine as an antenna, but this is really pertaining to the individual. For the construction of the network, I use another database, still from the same challenge. This is as precise as antenna. This is called the antenna traffic. There, it is really the antenna that registers each of the time points, the amount of calls that were made per refugee, from refugees, non-refugees, etc. So again, just to give you an idea of how it looks like, so basically, if we say we took August 2017, but we could do the exercises for each of the months, a bit how the night lights look in Turkey, and this also suggests that for each of the province, you have like kind of a big district, basically. That's the reason why you see 1 point illuminated on the kind of the center. So this I will skip. So then the second set of explanatory variables that we will explore as a second step are event variables. These come from openly available GDEL database. So GDEL database, so this is the global database of events, language and tones. These are news media worldwide. So from them we take all the events that occur in Turkey in 2017, but obviously we don't look at all type of events, because there are millions of them, billions of them. So basically what we did is we took some categories as a first attempt to look. We started with aid, and then we also added some protest events. So among the aid and protest events, we particularly look at 6 of them. So economic and humanitarian aid, asylum granting, and then violent protests, boycotts, and rallies for leadership change. The reasons why in the for the aid and then for protest we took those ones, because the other categories are very specific, such as, for instance, military aid, or could be things like chemical attacks or things like that for the protest part. We took things that existed in Turkey, so that has to be events that are related to the Turkish case, but could do this exercise with our other events. So one thing that is important to understand here is, so when I say we took events, so these are, if for instance one event occurs in Ankara, this is positive. It means that literally Ankara provided, say on 3rd March, some aid to a specific place, to some refugees in Turkey. So that's what I mean. So if, for instance, the event was they withdrew aid, then that would be noted because there is a variable that's help us identify whether it is a positive or negative. For instance, if it is a protest, if it has a negative connotation, that means a protest occurred. If it has a positive connotation, that means actually maybe it decreased. So if I say I have a protest event, that means a protest took place. And if I say there is an event, an aid event, it means there has been aid delivered. And then if it's economic aid, that would be characterized under economic aid. If it's an asylum grant, that would be asylum grants. And then again, because we aggregate at the province level, this becomes a sum of all the occurrences of events within the time that we look at, basically. So let me now present you a bit how the results so far look like. So as I said, so we look at the mobility and we look at two parts of determinants, gravity model determinants and news events. So the first column refer to gravity model only, and then in the second, third and fourth columns I report aid events. In here this is only for space and time constraints. I didn't report the protest events because they just didn't come up as significant at all. So this is the only reason why I do not present them. I do present only the aid events because they came out as significant. So basically on the first column, now you see, if you look at the first line, you see that nightlights at origin seems to act as a push factor. So basically the higher, the lower, let's say, the lower the nightlight, the lower the income at origin, the more there is mobility, basically. So the more there are departures from this province. If I now found an effect at destination, which is not the case here, for instance, suggests to be something positive, but it's not significant, that would be that income acts as a pull factor at destination. But in here, income, especially for the case of refugees, we will see that it's a bit different for non-refugees, seems to act as a push factor. This is the first and second line. Then for the distance now, third line, it has an expected negative impact on mobility. This is actually something that we expect. The longer the longer the distance between provinces, the less like you are. Again, that may be the case for some individuals, but we aggregate at the province level, so the likelihood that there are a lot of flows between very remote distances is lower. Then we also look at the network effects. Here I highlighted the non-refugee calls, which the refugee calls, which serves as a basis for the network measure that we have here. As you can see, this comes out as positive and significant. And then, as we move forward from the columns 2, 3, and 4, now I show that the aid events matter. So first of all, on the second column, if you look at economic aid at origin and destination, you see that it acts as a push, but then as a pull factor at destination for the refugees. On the third column, you see that its humanitarian aid particularly acts as a pull factor at destination. And finally, for asylum granting, on the fourth column, you see that it acts as a push at origin and a pull factor at destination. Of course, we have to also take this result with a grain of salt. We are not saying that we are capturing the entire universe of determinants. We look at some particular determinants here to characterize as a first attempt to characterize the mobility of the refugees in the sample. Then we did the very same with the non-refugees case. Again, I simply reported here those cases where I had significant results. So I reported the gravity model structure on the first column, and then only economic aid towards non-refugees here acted as significant at both origin and destination. So I didn't see humanitarian aid and asylum granting. Neither I saw anything about the protest. Actually, I'm almost done, so we'll have plenty of time to ask questions if you have some. So to wrap up, we provide an empirical estimation of the determinants for refugee mobility in Turkey, as I said. So in particular, we take this spatially explicit data set and we apply the standard gravity model and we combine this in here with GDEL, but there is potential to look at many more infrastructures in Turkey at the province level, and we find that mobility of refugees may be determined by the gravity model variables, so as in the migration literature, such as origin and source income, distance, as well as networks. In that case, for the case of refugees, we found that it is the origin income that seems to come as significant, and events related to asylum granting, humanitarian aid, and economic aid seem to matter. And finally, we benchmark our analysis with the case of the non-refugees. And thank you very much for your attention.
So we have time for questions? Yes.
Hi, Carlene Maitland, Information Sciences, Penn State University.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about the calling variables? So calling by non-refugees and refugees.
Yeah. You mean give more information on how the database is constructed, or?
No, more about the theory. What were you expecting there? What was the underlying?
Okay, I see. But basically in here we talk about, so we look at the population. These are registered refugees. They basically, if they have a SIM card, that means how do we know that they are refugees? Because this is a question that comes out often. Is in Turkey, if you go to a telecommunication company and you want to buy a SIM card, you have to use your identity card, and then if you're a refugee, you have a refugee card, so we know that it's a refugee. Not all the refugees communicate by calls, so if they do make calls, there are a particular set of people that are settled. There are some places in Turkey where refugee population is much more in contact with non-refugee population, and there are some cases where they are more concentrated among themselves. I think if you look at, we did some visualization. For instance, if you look at all the southeastern region of Turkey, so which is the border with Syria, there you see there is a database that shows you a bit how non-refugee, so there's another database that we don't explore where you can see how refugees communicate with non-refugees. But if you look at it, you will see that those places which are more big cities such as Izmir and Istanbul, you expect that refugees are more in contact with whoever themselves, but also non-refugees, and maybe more actively calling than those places which are more remote and more probably agricultural. Then you may also see, for instance, in the north, sometimes you see seasonal activities because you have rice culture. So it is not also only just about social interaction, but could also be just about work related. That's the reason why we take night calls, because we've seen also in other papers that usually what happens with the call patterns is it's very much linked to their work behavior. So say in the summer in some touristic regions you have much more calls. It just happens to be more the case. We also suspect that there is also another types of communication. I mean, if they call to Syria, especially with the first database, for instance, sometimes you don't have the second part of the call, and if you cannot trace the callee part, that indicates that the call goes outside of Turkey. So you have also such calls as well. So that means Syrian people, they also talk to their relatives back in Syria, or maybe they use internet, so I don't capture this information on the call. So yeah, that's... When you call more, you are not more like, no, but no, that is not the case. What I see is, because I know where each call was made, if for instance, you call every month 10 times from the same place, I think it's fair to assume that this person stayed in the same place. Could be that in 6 months, I'm making a call from a very remote place. That means I've been there, because this is where the call was captured. So I wouldn't say it's the intensity of the call here, it's the occurrence of the call, but obviously what we do is we use this threshold 10 calls to characterize as origin, and then we leave completely free the destination. So if my individual that I observe has never been to those places, when I aggregate, there are zero flows, and there are many zero flows. So yeah, and there you see tendencies. I mean, most often the moves are around a couple of provinces away. It's not always the case that you go from southeast to the far northwest, for instance, but happens also.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes. Oh, we have 2 questions on the screen. Can you see them?
No.
So one is, have you considered the ethical implications of how the data could be used for all ill purposes?
We can simply not do that because we've signed. I mean, this is so. They basically the challenge is such that before we publish any results, we have to somehow have the authorization of Turk Telecom on our results. So it was clearly stated when we had access to the data that our purpose is to improve the life of the refugees. So it's not about saying negative stuff about them. It doesn't mean that we have to kind of cluster ourselves to please the refugee population or anything. But then obviously you wouldn't come up with a ill-purpose plan to research on.
And what about text messages? Is there a relationship similar here that is tied to age and does not have an effect?
Yeah, so there is SMS traffic as well that we don't look. We don't have the content. It's very important to know that there is no content or whatsoever in the data that we have. It's geo-coded calls, so you know exactly when and where the call took place and from who. And then there's a database that allows you to see who you call in terms of the status of the person. So do you call a non-refugee? Does a refugee call a non-refugee or a refugee? But even for the SMS, you only know when and where this SMS took place and who sent this SMS. And for the SMS traffic, actually in the database that we use, you don't have SMS traffic. So you cannot look at 1 year for each individual their SMS messages. The SMS information, you have it for the fine-grained but non-individual database, which is antenna traffic. So each antenna, you know exactly how many SMSs they registered. And I think, if I'm not wrong, for the database too, where you have also the information on the callee part, on the status, you also have the activity on SMS, but then you trace the individual only 2 weeks. So you don't have that individual for during the whole year. So every time they kind of give a more disaggregate information, they kind of hide a bit more the individual information, or they give the individual information, but they make it coarse. So to alleviate the ethical concerns, basically.
Thank you. One more question.
Can I ask one more question on the phone data? I think I'm perhaps not fully getting it. So how do you know when one person moves? Because they might go and visit a relative in Ankara and then go back to their origin province. So how do you rule out someone who goes to visit someone for the holidays or whatnot to those who actually relocate?
Yeah. So again, one of the reasons why we look at province and not district, obviously when you look at province, you add a lot of zeros to the equation. If I was looking at district, that would be really your concern. Then it would be really important to know whether the reason why they move. Here we kind of remain completely agnostic about why and for what purpose they move. The only thing that is important for me is, did they leave a origin, a province that I characterize as origin, did they move from there? But then again, it's not at the individual level, but I aggregate at the province level. So what happens, for instance, what I can know is whether Ankara is somehow, refugees of Ankara, there are more flows between Ankara and Istanbul. That is something. For those refugees that were characterized, so for those refugees whose province was characterized as origin, let's say, I may know whether there are a lot of flows to Istanbul. This is the only information that I have. But I don't explain any more information than that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. One more clarification and one more questions, and then very quickly, please.
Sure. Just, I think, building on the question about age, do you have a sense of the demographics of folks who do buy telephones or SIM cards in Turkey, for example? Because I would imagine that it would be more likely that men would be buying phones or that the elderly would not be buying phones.
For the refugee population,
yes.
Yeah, that is true. And actually, it is mainly children and a young population. So there is also a reason to expect that it's their parents who buy the phone. So I don't know anything about who is making the call. I don't know if it's the wife of someone. I don't know if one call was made from both wife and husband. Because once I have the caller ID, I trace the phone. Actually, I don't trace the person. So if, for instance, I don't know, like a refugee woman buys a phone, but then the woman is not allowed to make a call, maybe I have only a male population in the sample, finally. So maybe it is supposed to be representative, but then finally, you know, those phones are maybe they sell their phones to further non-refugees. So we cannot really dig into those details. That is also a reason why we basically remain a bit far from prediction exercise, because this is not something that we do, and this will be very, very difficult to. We may predict things, patterns from the calls, but we can never 100% be sure who is making the call. So yeah, that's
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to have the same data, so if you have questions on the data, you can ask them to Caglar. The floor is yours.
Okay. So we've been talking about data. Just can I share a quick observation? By the way, I have bad eyesight. So, and these slides are small. So if you guys want to come forward, please feel free to do so. So one thing, while they're loading up the presentation, I was having a philosophical discussion with somebody last night, and we're talking about refugee data, but we are in that situation where we first find the data set and say, oh, this is great, and let's see what kind of questions we can answer. And it is problematic because you realize each data set, which was in most likelihood collected by somebody else for another purpose, and it really limits the set of questions you can answer. The next ideal step is actually we consider together the research question, the policy analysis or the policy impact, and the data collection at the same time. Unfortunately, this data set is not there. It's the same data set, and I'm going to move quickly. So this data set was provided by Türk Telekom, as Rana said, and it's designed by computer scientists. The way they did it, in case it's not clear in people's minds, the underlying data records who called, the cell phone number, at what time and through which tower, right? And which phone number you called, and which tower they are at, right? So location of the caller, the receiver, and the specific time to the second. But the way they gave the data is they can't give this information. So they aggregated in different dimensions, and they gave 3 different data sets. So one of them looks at which towers received calls at a given time, right? So there are, as I recall, around 40,000 towers affiliated with this company, and how many calls did they receive per given hour during the whole year? Okay, so that's critical. And of those calls, what percentage are done by refugees and what percentage are done by natives? And the way they assign refugees is also slightly problematic. So each problem the data set has actually limits the set of questions you can answer. So to get the SIM card as a refugee, there's a discount. It's a cheaper SIM card. So you have the incentive, but you have to show your refugee card. Right? So you get the SIM card, and there's a limit on how many calls you can make on the SIM card. So that doesn't mean in most likelihood, all of the refugee cards are used by refugees, but that doesn't mean all of the non-refugee cards are used by non-refugees. So keep that in mind, right? And also another problem you realize, so that's the first data set they gave. The second data set, they took a limited number of people, and they gave the data of all their calls throughout the year. But it's a small sample. It's a small sample of the people, but they don't give the tower. Or did they give the tower? I don't remember. They gave the time. So they limited, they gave the district, not the tower, exactly. They gave the district you're calling from, right? And then another data set, they sampled each month, 5,000 people. Right, so these are the 3 data. So they didn't give the underlying metadata. So if I was, if you had research questions and collecting the data from scratch, and when they sample the data, there are a lot of problems which I'm going to show you, which seem to happen randomly, errors. Like certain days are missing from the data for no explanation. And we went back to Türk Telekom. We said, can you give us the data for those days, missing 20, 30 days? They're like, oh, we erased the data. Right? So keep that in mind, all of these things. Now, let me start. How do I use this? Do I just press this? Okay. The question. So the beauty of the data, obviously, clearly, I mean, you have seen these papers on Turkey. they give at best now, the administrative data tells you how many refugees there are in each province in Turkey on a weekly basis. Of course, there are problems. This is by registration. People move, it doesn't capture it. So the beauty of this data, it actually gives, in a way, day by day. And it's finer than the province. Turkey is split into 81 provinces. Istanbul is a huge province. The administrative data gives, it currently says around 650,000 registered Syrians in Istanbul. It's the third biggest Syrian city in the world now. Some people say it's up to 1 million. The beauty of this, you can see within Istanbul at the neighborhood level where the Syrians are making the calls. Obviously, there's a problem where you're making the call is not necessarily where you live or where you are, right? Because as you're moving around, Istanbul has thousands of towers, right? It doesn't necessarily mean where you are. And it doesn't necessarily connect you, the system connect you to the closest tower, because there's also a capacity issue with towers. All right. So, but having this really fine geographic and temporal distribution in a way, if we can use it, it is not an aim by itself, but it becomes an input all these other analysis. So labor markets, product markets, real estate markets, or political markets. So that's the purpose. So what I'm going to do here actually show you kind of the limit, what we can do with this data and what you cannot do, because that's the real danger in my view. We get too excited about the data and try to answer the questions which are dangerous and we cannot answer. All right. So, talk about it. Now, this is I kind of described it. It's a remarkable effort getting anything from the quasi-government agencies in Turkey. As you know now, I mean, the government has extremely detailed data on refugees, including probably their shoe sizes, but they're not sharing any of that. So it was this computer science professor at Bosphorus University who managed to convince Türk Telekom. It was a remarkable achievement by itself. Now, the first problem arises there. This company has 25% of the market share. Right? It's not the only company. So their sampling is problematic, and you have no idea about that. Right? So keep that in mind, because they might have different market penetration rates in different geographic locations, and different market penetration rates among refugees or the natives, which you have no clue about that. So it does turn out, when you look at certain industry data, market analysis and stuff, there is significant geographic distribution of market penetration of this. There are 3 main cell phone companies in Turkey in terms of penetration. So that's a problem. So they have the way they have done is they have the underlying data, 185,000 SIM cards tagged as refugees, and 1 million overall customers. So the way we understand all of the refugees are there. With the natives, it's a sample. But the sampling is not based on a random sample of the natives, but random sample of the natives using the distribution of the refugees geographically across provinces. That's also critical. So if you have, for example, think of 2 provinces which has tons of same size provinces, same size market penetration, so same number of natives owning Türk Telekom SIM cards, but one has 10 times the more refugees, then you have 10 times the more natives sampled from that province in the data they gave us. So that's also critical. Yes? It hasn't been 10 minutes. Can you wait? No, I'm just kidding. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, just to understand something. So you emphasize the fact that you have 3 companies. My guess is that this means it's at a destination point that there is a problem.
I'm going to get there.
And in fact, I suppose what it says is that the destination will be, in fact, the interconnection tower.
No.
That will come out.
That I do not know. But there is a problem. So random, suppose everything is random. So a Türk Telekom customer SIM card we have makes a phone call. So there's only 1/3 chance they're calling another Türk Telekom customer, right? So of that 1/3, you know if the recipient is a refugee or a native. But the 2/3 of the recipients from the other customer companies, you don't know if the recipient is a refugee or a native, right? So that's for example, an information you cannot use given the sample. I don't know if that's, I think that's kind of the question you had.
Yeah. And
You know where the recipient of the call is located.
Okay.
But you do not know if the recipient is a native or a refugee.
Even if the guy has a telephone, a line from a different company. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go there. So anyway, these are the basic things. There's actually an edited book volume published using the proposals submitted for the challenge. Zoe has a paper where is there as well, right? So you can, all the details to, it makes you nauseous. You can read there. I'm not going to go through. All right. So this is, people had these maps, right? So this is I'm going to first show the value of this data. This is the distribution of the refugees across provinces based on UNHCR publications, and it's the same thing from the government administered data. Keep an eye on this, right? And this is what the cell phone data aggregated over the whole year looks like, right? Now, it looks almost similar, right? So I'm going to put them on top of each other. There are big differences. This is showing the shortcoming of the administered data. Look at Antalya. So of those of you who like the beach, who've been to Turkey, Antalya has actually more flights now than Istanbul, believe it or not, right? Around 25 million tourists go there annually. There are no refugees according to administrative data. Tons of refugees according to the phone data, because they're going there to work. They're not registered in Antalya, but they're there over the summer especially. The same thing, Black Sea coast, right? No refugees there. Black Sea coast, it's the hazelnut, tobacco, and tea harvest. Okay, so they're there. If you look at these things all monthly, that's the beauty of this data, you actually see where the refugees are. It's not perfect, but it is really much better than the administrative data. And you can actually see, you can overlap this. This is one of the things we're trying to do, overlap it with satellite imagery of agricultural land. Right? It's really, really beautiful. So that's the nice thing about this data. And then you can see, for example, the hazelnut and tea harvest happens in late August, September. There are no refugees there in January, but it goes up during the time. And you see them moving. This is my parents' hometown. They come here for the fruit harvest in early August, and then they move to the Black Sea for the tea and the hazelnut harvest. So that's, for example, an advantage of this data set, right? So you can do all these things. The other thing is, a lot of the papers you have seen is at the NUTS 2 level or NUTS 1 level. NUTS 2 splits the country into 26. That's how the labor force survey is sampled. A lot of the data sets are at the province level 81. This you can do at the, at the 100-meter level, which is obviously has problematic, but you can do that at the district level, which is around 900 districts in Turkey. Right? You can see the distribution over time over there. And this is the refugee share of the calls in each district. Now, this is going to matter of the market penetration. So if you don't have an idea about the market penetration, which that data they will not share, we tried really hard, then you do not know what the sampling is, how representative your sample is, not just relative to the country, but geographically over time. So keep that in mind, the things you can. Now, this is the call volume over time. There's also a lot of people dropping out, right? They get a SIM card, they use it for a month, and then it's not there anymore for whatever reasons. There are actually very few, and then the program picks up. But then you have these cases of X days. This is at the day level, right? They coded the data wrong, obviously, because there are days missing here. So, for example, probably there's no data for March 22nd, and March 23rd is twice the level. So they just coded both March 22nd and 23rd. So there are all these problems you have to worry about. You really have to look at the devil is in the details. And it's really scary. Suppose that the best computer scientists of the country work at these companies, and they can't seem to. I hope they don't hear this, but it's really problematic. But the overall pattern you see, this is the native calls, the blue line. It's pretty stable. There's a problem here, but the refugee one really picks up towards the end of the year. No, that's actually, I think their market penetration is going up. They're selling more and more SIM cards, right? It is not all of this. As they sell more SIM cards, that's the other problem. As they sell more SIM cards, they're adding them to the data because it's the universe of the SIM cards. Yeah, so you have to also, that doesn't mean more refugees are coming or refugees are making more calls. They're actually selling more SIM cards. So you have to really we spend an incredible amount of time figuring these out. Okay, so let me see. The first thing we did, okay, let's look at actually segregation and integration of the refugees. What can we tell from this data? Now, we're going to use the similarity index and assimilation index. These are the ones, it's a vast literature in sociology. For those of you who are not familiar with it, there are quite a few papers in urban economics that use these, or economics of discrimination, but it's not really common, well known among economists. So let me put this. This is Doug Massey's. I'm sure most of you know. He's one of the leaders of the sociology, migration literature in sociology. This is the famous paper, right? This is the Google Scholar, his page. It's his third most cited publication. This is a book, so it doesn't count. And this is a lit review, so that doesn't count either. It is really his most cited paper, published in 1988. Just as a comparison, this is one of the most celebrated migration economists. His most, this is a book, this is a literature review, so it doesn't count. And his most celebrated paper, published pretty much at the same time, right? How do I go back? Yeah, 88.7, right? And the same number of citations. So I just want to give you an importance of the issue that this is this whole segregation integration, how you measure them. There's a vast literature on this. All right, now this is the dissimilarity index. Basically, what you're looking at, each district, the share of the refugees. They do this for racial segregation. That's how it all started. Yeah. So the share of the refugees of the population in that district, how does it differ from their share in the overall population? So if the refugees are 10% of the population in every province, these are going to be 0. You add them, it's 0. So they're this is what dissimilarity measures. There are literally dozens of different metrics. Yeah. So if D equals to 0, it's complete. It's considered complete integration. There's no dissimilarity. Refugees, same portion of the population, right? So that's one way of doing it. Is the isolation index. Don't look at this. This is slightly looking at it differently. Now here, this is the share of the refugees in that population, and this is the share of the refugees in the whole population. Okay, are in most cases correlated. They actually match. If it is 0, perfectly, there's no isolation. One is completely isolated. There is significant correlation, but they don't exactly measure identical things. The problem with let me go back. In the dissimilarity index, the beauty of it is if the refugee population goes from 10 to 12% everywhere, it doesn't change the index. Yeah? But the isolation index changes. So to reduce that kind of changes, you normalize it with this denominator. All right. So if, again, a uniform increase going to 10 to 12%, increase the isolation index. So there are 3 problems with this data set. And you have to be very careful based on the problems, what questions you can answer. Right? One is Turks and the refugees. Maybe the refugees like to talk more on the phone. We don't know. Because we only have the call volume. Remember from the first data set. If I don't know how many SIM cards they sold, I only know volume, and suppose I can calculate at the district level or the cell phone tower. So that's number 1 issue. Number 2 issue is Turk Telecom might have a different market share depending on the different areas. Okay? Because I only see the Turk Telecom, right? And then turns out if I measure these things at the province level, at the district level, at the cell phone tower level, or we constructed our own grid, it leads to different calculations. Depending on how you divide the geographic area, it leads to different indices. So let's see how they look. So different call propensities, it doesn't affect the dissimilarity index. So we're good, right? it affects the isolation index. Okay, if the refugees like to talk more on the phone. So we have to, in a sense, that's the reason why we're using both of these indices to see how it might change. Okay. Now, so what I'm gonna go. So let me finish this. So to see if there is different propensity to make phone calls. Remember, there's the other data set. They had the 5,000 people. They tracked the whole time, and we had their whole call record. So we ran these regressions based on their call patterns, and turns out it's okay. Syrians are not definite. The Syrian customers of Türk Telekom are not more talkative than the Turkish customers of Türk Telekom. All right, so that it's actually a narrow band, the variation there. So we're good there. Yeah. Okay. Now, different market shares. So to be able to correct for that, what we did is, fortunately, the administrative data has the provincial numbers of refugees. So we kind of use them as weights when we're doing the indices. That we figured is the kind of the crudest and the best way we could come up with. Yes, Türk Telekom has this many calls on refugees in this province, but there are this many, refugees registered in that province, so we use that as the weight. They are correlated, but not perfectly correlated, indicating that the market penetration among the refugees is different, right? It's related to their overall market penetration rate, which from this data I cannot see, because remember they gave the Turkish data based on the weight of the refugees. All right. Okay. Now the geographic partitioning, so we did, okay, we know it's going to lead to different results, but let's split it and then see how the indices change depending on how we split the country. All right, so, okay, let's start. So the dissimilarity index. This is for the whole country, how it changes over time, right? Now, the data is not perfect, and then if I do it by district, by grid, we split the country into basically squares, pretty much. That's how it comes. And this is by antenna. Obviously, antenna is a smaller area. This is a bigger area. This is the medium thing. The smaller, in smaller areas, the segregation is bigger. Okay? But what you're seeing, I want to highlight the value. Now let's go, I don't want to keep on complaining about the data. This is, again, we're grateful. I want to show the strengths of the data. This is what Stephanie asked. This is very fundamental. Look at this week and this. Do you see the peaks? Do you know why that happens? Those are the Eid. This is the religious holidays. Okay, people go back to their hometowns from Istanbul or Ankara, big cities, or they go to the beach because it happened on the summer. And the Turks are more likely to travel than the Syrians during that week, 2 weeks, right? As a result, there are fewer Turks where the Syrians are, so the segregation level actually goes up. Okay, but then they come back, vacation is over, and then you're back to normal, right? So if you are seeing for the gravity model, I would slightly be worried because there seems to be, especially among the Turks, going back and forth, quite a bit of travel during the year, right? And I mean, all right. So, but overall, over time, there's a slight decline as especially the customer base gets bigger. The isolation, they're getting more integrated. Now, the isolation index slightly shows a different pattern. Okay, again, but this is simply because of the market size effect. As you're getting more refugees into the sample, not more Turks, the Turkish customer size stays the same, but you're selling more and more, it artificially goes up. All right, now, but these are not the exciting things. Okay, the exciting thing, so the next thing we did, okay, let's define urban areas. And the way we defined urban areas is the following. We looked at the density of the towers. So as long as there's a tower within 50 meters of each other, we call that an urban area. Okay, so Istanbul is pretty much the whole thing. Not only that, the province is next to it. You see how this is the industrial heartland and the really urbanized area. It is one big, massive urban area. Okay, Antalya has two urban areas. This is Alanya, another big town within the province. But a lot of the the provinces, these are provincial, the dots are the cell phone towers, right? So there's only one urban area. These two provinces, their urban areas are actually mixed. So you have this, we kind of, we didn't use the provincial capital as the urban areas, but the density of the, because we thought the density of the towers indicates the density of the population, right? And that, hello? Okay. So when you look at just the urban areas, right? Because the vast majority of the Syrians are in urban areas, except when they go for the harvest time. But even when they go to the harvest, they are probably staying in the town center. Okay? There's pretty much no difference, right? Over time, it's the same. And by the way, this level of the similarity index and isolation index is surprisingly identical to the dissimilarity. The Caglar and Glaser had these papers on the similarity of the immigrants in the United States. It's almost identical. It's 0.4. Yeah, it really is no different there, right? Now, the things you can do it for each big city. Now, Ankara is problematic because there are not that many refugees in Ankara. So depending on the sampling, so it's going up and down. So don't use for Ankara. This is the blue one is Istanbul. And you're seeing it's actually going down. Like this is, to me, the strongest indicator of how the integration is occurring over time. This southeastern, the cities with the significant refugee populations, it's pretty stable over time. Slightly increasing in Hatay because they're actually leaving from Hatay over time. You see it in the administrative data. They're leaving Hatay to go to other provinces. Izmir is also going down. So this is at the provincial level. These are the isolation indices. Again, Ankara is problematic because of the absence of data. There are not many refugees.
Can I ask one more question about the data?
If I know the answer, otherwise Simone is going to answer it.
No, I just have one quick question. So are refugees worried to give their refugee registration card when they get... so it just occurred to me because there has been this recent crackdown on sending people potentially back. So I wonder that if they get the SIM card, they have to show they're a refugee. Perhaps those who do are the ones who kind of feel fairly secure about their status. They have a job, and hence they have been staying there for longer. Their kids are there, so hence they're more integrated because time has passed and they've established themselves. Is that potentially something? And in Ankara, there are lots of.
I mean, this crackdown happened in 2019, second half of 2000.
Okay, sure.
This is happening in 2017.
Okay.
But then again, to do anything official, you have to show your refugee card. You go to the hospital, you show your card. You want to buy medicine under the insurance. I mean, to be fair, this is a huge burden on the country, and the Turkish government, they handle this quite well, right? This is not imagine any other Western European country with such a burden. You would have a civil war in most likelihood. So the financial burden and the administrative burden is significant, and given the constraints of the country, they handled well. But you have to show your card for everything. You want to put your kid in school, you have to show your card. You want to go to hospital, you have to show. Okay. The boss says I have to speed up. Now, another thing we did, how it changes over time. See, this is the first quarter versus fourth quarter. The dotted line is the 45-degree line. So the similarity index, and the size of the circle is how many refugees there are. Right? So this is the most integrated ones at the bottom are the southeastern cities. They're actually two ends. So Kilis is now 50% refugee, right? I don't know why this is coming really unintegrated. Maybe it's because of the size. So there, but in almost every case, every city, regardless of the size of the refugees, became more integrated. Okay, but the isolation index doesn't show the same thing. In the more integrated ones, it shifted up, and it kind of reversed, right? Those things you can. Now, I'm going to wrap up. There's so many things you can do. One of the beauties of this is Rana also mentioned. It's the time of the day data you can use, and that's what we have done, right? So we calculated the similar, and we did this for each city as well. But this is national average. So you look at the weekday. There is significant change. So you can interpret this as the The nighttime one is the residential segregation, and this is the labor market segregation. And labor market segregation is, I mean, it is lower, not much, but it's lower than the residential segregation. Okay, and it's the same thing you see with the isolation index. And here, let me go back. So even on the weekends, there is that effect, because actually a lot of people work on Saturdays, especially if you are low skilled and informally working. You see that the Sunday, if you just look at Sunday, it's more flat, but then you're reducing the sample size significantly. Yeah. All right. So I will conclude. Big data is great. But again, this is the kind of research you get the data first and try to figure out the questions you're going to answer. So we have to be, now our UNHCR colleagues, they have to be really aware of this. You're making data accessible to everybody, and don't expect people to answer every question you have, because it has to go the other way actually in real research. What the randomized experiments showed, right, that literature, that way of thinking, you have to think of the research question, the policy design first, and then figure out what data you're going to collect. Not this way around. But still it's valuable, right? But we spend, again, inordinate amount of time with Simone and Michel figuring out what's going on. There are a lot of flaws with the data. Part of it is by design, part of it, by the way, the errors they made in construction. So you have to, when you're using these things, be very careful. And the beautiful thing is the time dimension. I think the value you're seeing how things change over time. Segregation is not high. As I said, it's the African American segregation in the US is higher than the refugee segregation in Turkey, for example. That's one of the things that come out. The immigrant segregation in the US, and these are the immigrants who've been there, some of them for decades, is at the same level of the refugee segregation. So those are, and there is slight decline over time. I would love to get the data for 2019 and see what happened, but Türk Telekom is about to go bankrupt. So this is not a priority for them. It wasn't an issue. I just hope they don't erase all the data they have. Maybe we can purchase the data at the bankruptcy auction and open it up for, and then the nice thing is the residential and the labor market segregation. That's also a lot of stuff that can happen there. All right, but again, our plan is to, knowing the shortcomings of the data and the strengths of the data, going back and how you can use this as an input, analyzing all these other really important questions. All right, thank you very much. Don't ask data clarification questions.
Thank you very much for this, very interesting. One question about behaviors and constraints that we know exist in other countries when it comes to refugees trying to get or choosing actively not to get SIM cards. There are patterns where often it is through a citizen as a proxy that the SIM card is obtained. So just curious to what extent you can rule that out as a factor here.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a highly relevant question. But given the financial incentive, right, and given 185,000 people got the SIM card, right, that's a significant number. But then again, I don't live in Turkey. There are tons of Turkish academics who live in Turkey. They can answer that question better. But my sense is it's not an issue. People are not shy to show their refugee card to get a SIM card. I don't think so. I mean, there are many other things you would be worried about. But getting a SIM card is not one of them.
Yeah. The Turkish IDs are similar to the, so as a Turkish citizen, you also have to show your ID. So that's like kind of the common, sorry. As a Turkish citizen, you need to show your own ID card, and the ID cards also look like each other, the refugee card, and because it's the same like registry system. So it might, I think, like create like, and you're not required to show your refugee ID because you're a refugee. It's because you're buying a SIM card, and you have to show your ID. So that might make it like less discriminatory, I think, for refugees to. And you have to do it for any business you do with the government. So it's pretty much how things work in Turkey.
Yeah. Oh, Calgary. That happens. This is the Microsoft Word auto correct. My name appears as Calgary. Simone writes to me Calgary as well. No. But do you think would be less similar? There are 15. I think we answered that question. I don't know. I honestly do not know. Like any good government, Turkish government, like the Danish government, collects tremendous amount of data. If they wanted to harm the refugees, they have so much more data than this phone data. I mean, they you know, I think this wasn't a my gut feeling. You know, the phone companies figured refugees and the natives have different price elasticities, and they wanted to segment the market. And then computer scientists figured we might use that to our advantage and use it for research. That's my sense, but I don't know.
I have no. There is another question. I think the last one.
Yeah, this is critical. Yeah, I do not know. I do not know. I mean, Simone can correct me, but as I recall, when we met with the Türk Telekom people, there is a limit on the number of minutes on each card, right? So they do, and there's a number of minutes per month. So it is possible a lot of Syrians have a refugee SIM card and a regular SIM card. I mean, with your refugee card, you can get a regular SIM card. Nothing is preventing you, right? If you're going to really talk on the phone. So that's what I mean. Of the regular phone cards, it is possible a certain share of them are used by refugees. But given refugees are 4% of the population, in the normal circumstances, they would own 4% of the regular SIM cards, and they probably own less. So if you're pulling a random sample of the regular SIM cards, the share of the refugees in there is likely to be small. I don't think it is going to introduce such a big bias. But it is possible, you know, I mean, you use the phone card to the max, and then you switch, because it's a cheaper rate, then you switch to the regular SIM card. That, I don't know how to correct the data. And it depends on what the research question you're having, whether if that correction is needed to answer that. Yes.
How do refugees buy non-refugee SIM cards?
They go to the Türk Telekom sales office, say I want to buy a SIM card, show their ID, and buy it.
Just to translate what the answer, it means you don't need, contrary to what you say, to show your refugee card. It's only if you want to benefit from
No, there are two things. You need to show an ID to buy any SIM card. I need to show an ID, you need to show an ID. You can only say buy one cheaper SIM card, and only the people with the refugee ID can buy that. I cannot buy that. Yeah, so that, yeah. So, yeah.
A more general question.
Paolo.
So why, no, this is my question.
Oh.
I'm here. So why this outcome? Why segregation? Why should it be good or bad? Why should we be interested in segregation at all?
Okay. Do you want the short answer or the long answer?
A short one, please.
Because if you look at any medium, long-term economic, social outcome, I think a lot of it depends on segregation, right? Whether if it's the labor market performance or the social welfare burden we're seeing, or social harmony, right? It's all about, I think it's all about segregation. So there are all these now couple papers emerging based on the Vietnamese refugees who came to the US at the end of the Vietnam War, right? They were randomly assigned. And then you look at their outcomes, for example, versus the next wave, which were allowed to settle where they are. And there are differences, okay? Whether if you need to banlieues or the ethnic ghettos, And we do know how it affects the second generation, and it is a big problem in Turkey. Now, finally, they woke up. They realize Syrians are not going back, and that's part of the reason they're pushing. The school enrollment rate at the elementary school level is, what is it? Semi had the statistics. It's over 90%. So all of these things matter. So one of the questions we'd love to answer: whom are the Syrians talking to on the phone? I mean, that's a critical thing. Are they talking to other Syrians? Are they talking to Turks? And at what time of the day whom they are talking, right? If during the day you're talking to Turks, maybe it's business, but at night it's more likely a social thing, right? But unfortunately, the data that we cannot answer. So, I mean, any economic outcome, I can definitely give a logical and an economic answer why segregation matters for that outcome, and I can probably give an econometric evidence to support that.
So
as
this
well.
is for others to use in papers.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. We want to show this segregation first to basically go to the other analysis, all these other things, like real estate markets, right? So we have some preliminary evidence how it's affecting the real estate markets, and it is not the way you'd expect. And I think it has a lot to do with even at the neighborhood level, where you live, where you decide to live, and which is obviously endogenous. But we first need to know where you decide to live.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I had a question also on segregation, but I have two questions. So one was, can you take the data that you have and overlay it with other data, for example, refugee kids in Turkish schools, and see how, I'm not a data person, so I don't understand whether that's possible to look at, social cohesion, more real integration.
Exactly. Definitely. You can take, because it's at the tower level, right? And I have the geolocation, literally GPS coordinates of the schools, and the catchment areas of each school. So you can overlap it. You make certain assumptions that if you're making a call, it's probably you're in the catchment area, and then you can get a share of the refugees. But again, assuming I can somehow make assumptions and control for market penetration, phone call propensity, what we call in our calculations, assuming I can fix those sampling issues. Of course you can, because you want the administrative data. They probably do not have, maybe they do, I don't know, but exact precise location of your residence. That's what you need for that kind of question, right? And also, now, another big constraint in Turkey, this whole push about putting the kids into the formal education system, which I think is the right thing to do. But because the refugees are concentrated geographically in certain neighborhoods, it leads to congestion at certain schools. Now, this is ironic because Turkey entered demographic transition fully, and the overall capacity at the education system is like there's a lot of slack. We have way too many schools now, and way too many teachers, believe it or not. But the slack is in the wrong places. So how can we get the refugees to move? We lost it, right? So that's a problem. But I need to then to be able to know where the refugees are, and the telephone data is one of the best sources for that.
Okay. And my second question was the map that you showed, which was interesting, where the refugees are going for example, employment. How can you, and I know you said, this is not the best way to do it, it's backwards. You want to actually decide what your questions are and then get the data. But big data like this is becoming more and more accessible. So how can we use this kind of data to answer key policy and program questions? So for example, if people are moving to those places, what could we, UNHCR, what could we do or the government do to support those people that are moving, maybe to mitigate some of the housing challenges they may face while they're they're workers in that area? So
one of the things we tried, again, didn't work with Turk Telecom. Also, another problem happens with all these phone companies. They see the World Bank, the dollar sign appears in their eyes, and they think I'm going to pull out a $10 million check. But one way of using actually the cell phone is to do short surveys. Right? You can do, and it's extremely cost effective. And you also know where the guy is when he's sending you back the response. I mean, the beauty of this is the time and location, right? And we have surveys which can have a large sample, but you don't know exactly where they're located, and we can't do it frequently enough. Or we have administrative data which limits the number of questions. So that's one way of actually not using the phones, not the phone data itself, but the phones as a conduit for collecting other data. So that's one way of doing it. But again, you need to convince the cell phone company this is also in their interest, that they're not selling you a service because they see it, oh, it's a marketing ploy, I'm selling a service, pay me money. But you have to convince them, look, this is in your interest to get to know your clients better, for example, right? So that's one thing we can do. The second thing, I mean, ideally, if it would work, I would get the data from the 3 cell phone companies and somehow, right? There's a network externality in this data. The more data you have, the marginal value of the data also increases. That's the other thing. And UNHCR and the World Bank has kind of that convening power because we're not a marketing company or anything. So you work with the, I'm making this up, Jordanian government and go to them, look, this is the kind of thing we need you guys to collaborate on this. At the end of the day, they need the government license to operate, right? I mean, the government also has a lot of leverage over them. So that's the kind of thing from the top of my head. But it is hard to convince these guys to do anything, to be honest.
Okay, thank you very much, Caglar. We need to move on. Last presentation from Stephen.
Great, thanks everyone. Can I have it on this one as well too, please? Thanks. I'm Stephen O'Connell. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University. I'm glad to get to present some work with a couple of co-authors who are here with us. Onur, you heard from in the last session. He's at Bentley University, as well as Matilda, our partner at UNHCR Lebanon, and her colleagues Aimee and Paolo, as well as Aytug and Zeynep, who are graduate students at Harvard Kennedy School and Northeastern University, respectively. They are both political scientists, comparativists, and they will be on the job market later this year. I can tell you that they are great colleagues. They would be great colleagues for you too. So I'll talk to you today about something we've been working on for a while, since about 2018, on the targeting of humanitarian aid programs and whether we can do this using existing data sets. So, this one? Okay, great. I won't give too much introduction to the background to the Syrian refugee situation in Lebanon. Everyone is pretty familiar with that at this point. We know that there are more than 1 million refugees currently there, and at this point, Lebanon has the highest refugee to population ratio. The primary mode of basic needs assistance to refugees is carried out through unconditional cash transfers, which are jointly administered by the UNHCR, WFP, as well as other partners. And they target these unconditional cash transfers with the intent of prioritizing the most socioeconomically vulnerable among the refugee population. The challenge in doing this, which is a challenge in any context in which there's program targeting, is allocating aid to the most vulnerable, and in particular here in a context of chronic underfunding, capacity constraints, and limited information on socioeconomic status. So, sorry you can't see this too well, but we know that in Lebanon, refugees are living throughout the country. There are different levels of concentration in different regions. They're not clustered in camps, and again, somewhere north of 1 million in the country these days. The two programs that we'll talk about targeting that we've been working on consist of an unconditional cash program, which you heard a little bit about yesterday, which is a $175 a month transfer per household. And again, as we'll become familiar with, this is something that's allocated from the bottom up with the intent of prioritizing the very poorest. There are also restricted and unrestricted food vouchers, which in name they're food vouchers, but these are also essentially cash transfers, and these scale with household size. It's a monthly transfer of $27 per member, and again, allocated in principle from the very poorest up. So eligibility for these programs is intended to be for households who spend less than $87 per person per month. Now, sometimes program constraints don't allow that entire population to be served, but this is essentially the population that is to be targeted. Those that are below what's known as the survival minimum expenditure basket, which is a consumption level determined by the government of Lebanon. And in 2018, about 55% of households were below that minimum expenditure basket. Okay? So these programs are intended to reach this 55%, and there are annual program cycles that operate from October to September. So the traditional approach to targeting anti-poverty programs of this nature are proxy means tests, in which there's typically a representative survey of a potentially eligible population, living standards type survey, in which demographics and verifiable assets are used to predict socioeconomic status, and a set of predictors is taken from these surveys and then essentially applied to the entire population to score the very poorest up to less poor and richer households in order to target these programs. The things that come out of these surveys very often and are used for the targeting components are things like family size and structure, demographic structure, as well as verifiable assets. Do you own a TV? Do you have a mobile phone, a refrigerator, stove, these kind of things that can be observed by enumerators when they go and do household visits. Okay? Then these data are essentially combined, and households are scored according to coefficients from the model once that information is collected in a survey from the entire potentially eligible population. Now, as we're thinking about this in the context of Lebanon and the entire potentially eligible population being quite sizable. Okay? Now, this approach, something quite like it, was used to target unconditional cash transfers in Lebanon in 2014-15 and 2015-16. But there are particular challenges of doing this kind of proxy means test in the context of refugees. It's a relatively homogeneous population. It's quite poor to begin with. It's been made even more homogeneous because most assets have been left in the home country. It's mobile internally and externally, so targeting needs to be done on an annual basis. It was found out that it was quite difficult to reach the entire population in these targeting surveys. When this was done in those years, more than 30% of households were not able to be reached. This might end up implicitly preferencing urban areas or more stable households. And when a household isn't reached, to collect these indicators that you get out of the survey to rank them with everyone else, they're just immediately not able to be included or considered for the program. So there are some drawbacks to this. In 2015-16, this survey-based PMT was ended and replaced by alternative targeting methods. And just for disclosure, the first couple rounds of this were joint between UNHCR, WFP, and a team at AUB. Our team has been working on this since about 2018, the last couple rounds of targeting. So the real question about this paper is whether we can use administrative, or what I'll put in quotes here, registration data that many people are familiar with. These are records that are routinely collected by the UNHCR in order to target these unconditional cash transfer programs. Can we move away from the survey-based model and use existing data for a new purpose? And if we do that, how well can that be done? what are the cost and other considerations to take into account. Now, why this is a bad idea is that this database is collected and maintained for completely different purposes. It's not designed for assistance targeting whatsoever, and there's really no reason to expect ex ante that registration data will be good at targeting socioeconomic vulnerability. Okay? Second question, we will actually take on how this targeting approach and its accuracy compares to the traditional survey-based proxy means test, even under an assumption that you could reach 100% of the households. And if there are any differences between these two in terms of targeting accuracy, how could they be explained? Okay. So the data is going to rely on two sets. The data to do this are going to rely on two different sources. One is a National Representative Household Survey, which is being conducted annually to understand and communicate the situation of refugees in the country. About 4,500 households are surveyed every year. And really all we're going to take from that survey, which is going on anyway, is the expenditure data for these households. Now, this survey also includes full household and individual modules, covers demographics, work and income, debt, as well as assets. But for what we're going to do, we're only going to take expenditures out of there. This is going to be matched to the registration or the enrollment records that UNHCR keeps and maintains for its core operational objectives in the country. So we know that these records have basic demographics and background, age structure, demographic structure of the household, some information about medical and health situations, some protection flags, things like single woman, working child. And these records are updated by in-person interviews, either on an annual or biannual basis, or when refugees' situations change. Okay? We can also add into this part of this administrative data. We know who is currently receiving either of these programs, as well as other smaller assistance programs. Very quickly, I'll show some summary statistics of these. We know that the refugee population is relatively young. About half in these records are female, relatively uneducated, high proportion who had either no listed profession or were housekeepers, very few individuals who report having worked in service occupations before. And at the household level, on average, households are between 4 and 5 individuals. Household head, on average, mid-30s. And we see that demographic structure heavily tilted toward younger populations. The average share of dependents in households across the country is around 50%, which is not particularly due to the elderly. Okay? And again, I'm happy to take questions as we go through this. We should have plenty of time. So we take what we can out of the registration data and construct a set of potential predictors that will be fed into the modeling process. This ends up being aspects of household size, structure, what we have on education, what we have on prior occupation, year of arrival, whatever protection measures are in the data set, and geographic indicators. Okay? Around about 50 to 60 variables that might be considered in determining this targeting model. When you think about what we're trying to do, this graphic generally encapsulates the idea and the challenge. What I'm plotting here is the distribution of expenditure per capita across households in Lebanon. Let me just do this and then we'll. And the blue line is the $87 per person per month. So the challenge in targeting for these programs is to correctly predict the people who are over here to be less than $87 per month. Yeah, question?
Sorry if I misunderstood. I was not understanding why you wouldn't use all the variables and let the machine tell you
That's what we're going to do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we use all the variables from this limited set that's in the registration.
Why? Oh, so those are all the variables that you have, or not?
Those are all the variables in the registration.
So
data.
I thought you were.
Yeah, we're going to take all of them and slim them down and then see how it does.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So to do this administrative data approach, we can only use fields that are in the UNHCR database because we need to be able to develop a model that then can be extrapolated and predicted into the full population from which you then target. Okay? So again, these are just demographics, location, some background, and some things to think about here is that this approach is going to have potentially a slightly lower concern regarding endogenous underreporting of scoring variables, which people at this conference have worked on before and shown that when proxy means tests are carried out, that if in 1 year you ask about TVs, next year a whole lot more people are reporting that they have TVs. These kinds of things can happen. There's a relatively involved process to change your household composition in these administrative records, so we're not too worried that people are pulling individuals into the household in order to game this modeling.
Yeah,
And
this is not a household, it's a case.
It's a case.
Yeah, so.
Sure. All active cases are going to be scored, and in expectation, these cases are being updated every 1 to 2 years, and non-active cases are being removed from the data. So part of the challenge here is that we also want to generate a unique ranking in an out-of-sample prediction. So we need to preserve, the way I set up the problem a minute ago is I said we need to predict everyone to the left of the line correctly. For operational purposes, we actually want to maintain a unique ranking, okay? And this is, again, an out-of-sample prediction exercise. So to do this, we're going to use cross-validated estimators that protect against overfitting. Yep.
I just have one question, since you're looking at the cases, right, that you have in the progress database. To what extent are you sure that all of the cases live in the same household, or that a household is only made up of one case? I remember when we looked at the Wazir database, sometimes in one household there's more than one case, or perhaps not the entire case lives in one household. I mean, I'm not sure how you would handle this, but I mean, perhaps our UNHCR colleagues have a better idea of this, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, that certainly does happen, that they live in the same household. From the UNHCR database, from the Wazir data, we'll know how many people are living there, even if they're from multiple cases. And so all we're getting out of that from those data are the expenditure per capita for the people living in that household. So that generally applies if you're in 2 different cases.
Okay. Okay, and I have one more question. And when we were using the progress database, there were a lot of concerns raised about the occupation variable when we were talking with UNHCR, since they said it could also be occupation back home in Syria. They weren't sure how much of it is really updated. I don't know if our UNHCR colleagues now have new information, but I was just wondering, because I saw you were using it, right, for the housekeeper or not? Or you're just using that as noise and just use it as a predictor?
Yeah, I mean, we're just using it as a predictor. It may be current occupation, it may be occupation prior. The way they asked that question might have changed, but if it doesn't give us any information about predicting household expenditure per capita, it'll be tossed out of this anyway, because we're not going to force there to be coefficients in these models, because we're going to have regularized linear regression, which is going to choose which features remain in the model. Okay, so the details of the econometric procedure here, we're going to be estimating log per capita expenditure with that full set of variables that we have from the registration data. And we're going to use, our primary approach is to use a lasso regression, which is really going to solve a minimization problem subject to a constraint on the total number of coefficients, or rather the total aggregate size of the coefficients in the model. Okay? What this does is, again, essentially protect against overfitting. Now, in the last slide, I had a little note on this, that we have 4,500 observations. We're only using about 60 variables. We don't necessarily worry too much about overfitting, although lots of those variables are highly multicollinear, so this is the right tool to be using for the situation. Okay? Lambda, the hyperparameter, is going to be chosen by cross-validation, so we're essentially going to be using holdout samples to ensure that we choose a penalty parameter that will work for out-of-sample prediction. Conceptual mapping of the databases that we use, I'll just go through this quickly. We have the VASIR data from which we extract the expenditure per capita, and for that sample, we match that with the UNHCR database and the assistance records, etc. That gives us a vector of coefficients. However strongly we want to penalize them. I'm not even going to present to you any of these coefficients because we don't really care about what they are in service of knowing what is our prediction accuracy. Okay, so once we have those coefficients, we can predict back into the full population for the targeting purpose, as well as for our paper to be able to know how this model is performing. Okay. So a quick check, what we do present to see that the model is actually capturing things that we would expect is to look at what are the characteristics of different cases at percentiles of predicted expenditure. So you can look at the 10th percentile, larger households, more likely to be female-headed, let's see, more likely to be having low education levels. People at the 90th percentile, small household size, much more likely to have higher education. So even though we're not going to be requiring all of these variables to be in the model, explicitly we're capturing profiles that we think would be poorer versus not. In general, our overall rate of severe vulnerability, which is that $87 per capita figure, is about 55 to 56%, which is actually matching the aggregate figure in the country. It's relatively consistent across different regions of Lebanon, so we have that sort of check that we're just capturing things in aggregate in a way that makes sense. Okay. So we're going to compare this approach to the accuracy of a model built in the, let's say, the traditional way, if we were to take the same household survey that we have, select down from a much wider set of variables, and assume that we could go out and collect those variables from the however many 100,000 households are in Lebanon. Okay? We're going to use the same cross-validated penalized regression model with demographics, geographics, as well as the set of asset variables that are in there. And again, as I said, this is going to assume that this survey deployment would reach 100% of the households. So really, what this paper is about is asking what's the value of household visits in terms of targeting accuracy for large-scale humanitarian UCT programs. Okay? So we're going to have 3 metrics of this. What I'll present are just the first 2. In the paper, we have a different one, but you all may be familiar with metrics of inclusion and exclusion error. Inclusion error asks, of those whom we're predicting to be below 87, who will be in the program, who are, of those who are predicted to be in the program, who are not being correctly predicted, they are actually richer than we think we have them. Among those who should be included in the program, what share have been wrongly excluded? That's exclusion error. And I'll just say that on the next slide is going to be the main results of the paper, which are really just comparisons of inclusion and exclusion error between these 2 approaches. Okay? So getting at what is the value of household visits in terms of targeting accuracy. And what we have here is the administrative data approach to the left, inclusion and exclusion error, and the survey-based approach to the right, inclusion and exclusion error. So we're going to compare the red series, 31% inclusion error in the administrative data approach, to 29% in the survey-based approach. So assuming that you could go collect any asset data that you want, you would only be reducing inclusion error by about 2 percentage points, and these differences are not statistically significant between those 2. Exclusion error is slightly lower to begin with in the administrative data and only reduces by about 3%, again, even if you had that flexibility to go to 100% of households and collect assets. Okay? We had a reasonable referee, thanks for that, suggests that we should check this approach against a whole bunch of other methods and choices. We've checked it against, that lasso model is one particular implementation and one way to penalize the coefficients. Elastic nets or ridge regressions, again, comparing to the survey-based approach, those don't really make much difference. There are clear advantages over using forward selection models, or of course, as you might expect, overfit OLS or random forest models. So in general, penalized regression is only a few percentage points higher than undertaking the survey-based approach and not statistically different from each other. So then we were asked, well, if we could add one or two variables to the registration data to then reduce those targeting errors to the level at which you could get from the survey data, what would those be? So we can start with our administrative database model and essentially pull one by one the survey variables in to see whether a small number of these could actually achieve those reductions if we had the scope. Now, we don't know whether that's possible, but at least we can answer the question in principle to see if there were a scope to collect different things at registration, what would those be in service of targeting? Okay? So again, you can't see too much, but really there's a couple things here. To the left of the graph is a reduction in targeting error. That's good. There's a couple variables that reduce targeting error by a couple percentage points. The biggest one that stands out is information on the type of housing that refugees are in. This is something that, one, is not necessarily related to the demographics or the simple information that we already have in the registration data. Two, makes up a large share of expenditure typically. And three, has a lot of variability in the population. There are households living in tents, there are households living in very poor structures or no structures at all, as well as some residing in apartments and things like that. So could housing type be added to the registration data? The couple percentage points difference in targeting error would be substantially reduced. Other additions could be whether they have beds or has a refrigerator, but those are probably harder to know from a registration perspective. All the rest have really trivial effects on reductions in targeting error. We also performed a blind out-of-sample validation where after we developed this model, we went to an additional 500 households that were not captured in that vizier that we used to train the model. This is a bit of overkill because we were doing cross-validation anyway, and we didn't. But there was secondary objectives that were wrapped in with this, and basically we can show that in the training data, the error rates, as we would expect, are very comparable to an extra sample, in fact, collected several months later and several months closer to the program implementation. So to some degree, this speaks to whether these are intertemporally reliable. And yes, we generally conclude that that's fine. Then we really wanted to compare the targeting accuracy of these programs to accuracy of programs around the world, to the degree to which we know about these. So I didn't discuss this metric that we're using, but there was a review paper in 2004, which seems like forever ago, and if anyone knows of any newer reviews in this literature, it'd be great to know, where they took close to 100 targeted programs run by governments around the world, came up with a metric that could make them comparable across each other, and then essentially did a meta-analysis of targeting accuracy across these programs. What we're plotting here, each position on the x-axis is a different program, obviously lined up in a particular way. And there are all these programs. The median is the dashed line. Sorry if you can't see it. And then we're plotting against different variants of this modeling that we've done for Lebanon, where those fit in the distribution of targeted programs around the world 15 years ago. Okay. In general, this is roughly in the middle, just above the median. So it's not too far below what the average program is doing. So this is really the first paper that I've worked on, which is essentially a null results paper, in a sense. There's not a huge difference between these two approaches. And we're finding that humanitarian agencies can target an at-scale unconditional cash or in-kind transfer program to refugees using existing data without surveying the entire population and without a major loss in targeting performance. We can then point directly to a small number of variables that could, in principle, be added to the registration data to improve even further, although that improvement is relatively small. And we validated it. There's lots of detail in the paper about this blind out-of-sample test. Now, in terms of practical implications, for this program, the cost savings of not going and surveying every household is around 3 to 4% of the program budget. Okay? So if this is recycled and reallocated into the program, it essentially pays for itself in terms of that additional exclusion error. Right? Exclusion error is about 3 percentage points higher. And so there's significant cost savings to this. Now, some final thoughts just to end on the right note is that do we think we have solved poverty targeting? No. Targeting 50% of the population is relatively easy as far as programs go. Some programs only can target 5% or 10%. We know that targeting error is going to mechanically increase as the share of those targeted goes down. But we show, and we'll show in the paper, that this moves in parallel across the different approaches. So even if you're trying to target the poorest 10%, you can still use administrative data to do it. We're targeting 50%, and it's still in the same neighborhood. Relative cost savings are going to increase with the ratio of survey costs to the aid package. The aid package under the cash program to these refugee families is about $2,100 a year. That's relatively large for unconditional cash transfer programs around the world. So the degree to which survey costs are roughly the same around the world, I mean, yes, I know they're not, but smaller programs, the cost savings from not going out to survey every household is going to be larger relative to the size of the aid package. And so we're working now on understanding heterogeneity and targeting accuracy across subpopulations and what considerations in terms of modeling can be built in. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I start with a question. So we have 2 papers that did exactly the same thing, one in Jordan and one in Chad. And one of the problems that we found with the proxy means test is really the linear predictions, which is very poor on the tails, and therefore you really need to work on the error term. Now, with the classification method you use, that's a completely different approach. But so I have a follow-up paper where what I do is actually comparing the linear OLS model with the logic model with the lasso model, random forest, to see whether you can gain in terms of exclusion and inclusion errors. And you do gain in certain cases. But what it comes out is actually that what really matters is the poverty line. So as you move the poverty line along the distribution, what happens is the certain model become better at predicting poverty or consumption. And so I wonder whether one, you've thought about the tails and the error terms in those terms, and 2, whether you've looked at the sensitivity of this exercise moving the poverty line.
Yes, we have. I didn't have it ready to show today, but essentially you can think of what's the inclusion and exclusion error rate essentially on this last point, right? If I target at 50%, or if I'm targeting further in the tails, right? Does one actually surpass the other when you're only targeting 5 or 10% in a substantial way? The answer is no. I don't have it in a graph to show you, but the lines move very much in parallel.
So in the current validation exercise, you needed a household survey to calibrate the registration data with the model. Can in the future UNHCR operation, can we do without a household survey? Because we will have the registration data and we can apply your findings, so the key variables that you took from the registration data, can we do without a household survey, you think, for the targeting?
So the validation survey that we did was not essential to developing the model nor assessing its accuracy rates. It was an additional check, and we actually did this the first year, and it wasn't necessary after that. So I don't know if that's quite what you were asking, but this validation survey, as I was saying, is actually overkill because we know that the cross-validated error rates should be good out of sample, which is essentially what these three are showing compared to those three.
So the registration data suffice, actually?
Yeah, I would say in this context, I was trying to put a little bit of bounds around this. When you're targeting at about 50%, and you have programs of this nature and scale where the cost savings make sense, then that's what it seems like here.
Yeah, and part of the reason is because the explanatory power of the Beine variables is very, very large. So you got household size and you have most of the explanatory variable there, and then it gets very, very small as you get down the list. And in fact, if you have 6, 7 variables, that's enough. And those 6, 7 variables actually are already in the registration system. So, I mean, one recommendation is what other variables the registration system could include that would really increase the explanatory power of that model. And that would be something that the UNHCR could use.
Yeah, that's what this was doing, at least from the set that are in the survey data that we could sort of test out. That's exactly what we're trying to answer with that. Yeah. I had some there.
Can I go to measurement and Stephanie's question for a second? Because you still have kind of the training on one in the one data set, but you need it to be measured similarly in the progress in the registration database at the same time, right? So if they're not collecting it in the same way that they were collecting it in kind of the training data, that's still going to be measurement in that registration data is still going to be important across surveys, right?
You would be right if I were using the same variables from the household survey in the training step. We actually bring that vector of registration variables and merge it only onto a single column from the household data. And then that's used to predict back into the population. So we're using the same variables in the training data set on the right-hand side as are used in the prediction for the entire population. Does that answer it?
We can talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, so I agree with what Paolo was saying. What's useful for us is to know what else we would have to put back into our progress database. But I'm thinking about something, and I couldn't see because it was so small, what were the other variables you were using. But for example, one of the things that we don't always have in progress is what kind of assistance programs refugees are getting, which also I think impacts, where somebody sits along that line, right? So say, for example, someone, an NGO is providing agricultural support, or they're doing a livelihoods program for those particular families, which would change, in my view, where they sit. Just because there's a lot of smart people in the room, I also want to say that it's not just targeting for cash. Right now, the World Bank, under the IDA 18 refugee sub-window, we have a lot of programs looking at social protection, and we're being asked who should go into these social protection programs. So in the Republic of Congo, we're being asked, who do we target to go into these programs? So it's really important that this discussion on targeting really help us, because we don't have answers. And it's becoming more and more important for us to be able to do this. And like you say, if it's equally valid at much less cost, then that's what we should be looking at. But this is just so everyone in the room knows, this is a really important conversation for us right now around targeting, but not just for cash, for other programs as well.
Thanks.
And
or more information. I mean, first of all, thanks very much. It's like Betsy said, very, very timely and very relevant. We're getting requests for targeting, all the time, and don't have, a lot of evidence to point to inform decision making. And the way that you frame, the question about adding variables also is relevant, because that's something we can change. And if we can take evidence into that discussion, that's also helpful. But this, it's not it's not quite enough in this case because we also operate in very diverse settings, and the explanatory variables in some cases aren't going to apply to others. So it's also a call. I think we need more work like this to strengthen this argument. It's a great start. We have the potential to add variables to progress and create tools to do this. But I think we do need to build on this. And then just two pieces of information too. You raised the question about the occupation codes. I think this was Stephanie. It's problematic. It's something we've been working on, and we're looking to make some changes to that to better suit work like this. And in fact, our colleague Felix back here, this is something he's been looking at in quite some detail. He'll be part of the team here at the Joint Data Center. Similarly, the issue around the household definition and the case definition that Paolo raised. This is, on the surface it doesn't seem like much, but it's actually quite tricky when you start to match the administrative records against household surveys. Also, when you look to compare some of the indicators to national populations, which is, of course, not the first thing you think about in terms of targeting, but in terms of the broader policy context, it's absolutely critical to have that comparability with national surveys and national populations. But it's a challenge you should be aware of, at the onset, and it's also something that we're looking into and trying to both provide the background material to help your research, and then also to support changes in the way that the data is collected to try to resolve these issues too. So, two pieces of information.
Yeah, thanks for that. I agree, but I also agree with what Paolo said, which is that the changes in terms of adding variables are going to be very marginal after the first 6 or 10 things you find as the strongest predictors. But yeah.
But if we can, have evidence about what those 6 or 10 variables are,
sure.
Then that allows us, and we have the space in, for example, in progress. You're familiar with the core registration variables, but there's already add-on optional modules for a socioeconomic entity. It's currently populated with just kind of a generic set of indices, but we're trying to use evidence like this to actually inform a more thoughtful approach to what that module looks like. And we have, kind of in the plans for the year to come too, is actually to change what that looks like in the registration system. But we don't want to do it in an ad hoc way. We want to, because it was done initially in sort of an ad hoc way. So we want to have that conversation about what should go into it, what can go into it.
Thanks. Tuan?
Yeah, so just to follow up on Jet's point, I think here we need the survey and we need the registration data to train the model. And I think on the savings part is not if a variable is significant or not to predict, is when it is the case. Because ideally you want to go in a place and just do registration and know what variable to choose, and not do a whole list of variables, launch an expensive survey, and then train the model, and then so do we have enough data, enough experience to be able to know which variables are good predictors and in which circumstances they are or they are not? Do you have an intuition on that?
I mean, whatever we have here is going to be probably specific to the refugee situation, a very large scale one with a very highly homogeneous population. So, I mean, can you extrapolate that to a non-refugee situation? I don't know, but I mean, we're happy to share what we found, and there's going to be a list of things that will just always be collected anyway. That's sort of what we're saying gets us most of the way there, because what's already being collected anyway is what's in the registration, and that really gets close. So, I mean, I don't have a final answer as to what we can, but
we do to a certain extent. I mean, we have done that on Lebanon and Jordan and compared the results, and the variables, the prediction capacity of variables is very, very similar. Of course, the Syrian refugees in 2 neighboring countries, but the 2 countries are different. And also when we did it on Chad, the list of variables and the order of variables is also very similar. And so, we're fairly confident that these models can be extended to other types of populations. Of course, every time needs to be retested, so you need consumption data to recalibrate the model at the country level, but otherwise can be done.
Onur?
I just want to add one piece of information, is that I think because as most of the assets are left in the home country, the assets that they can carry is human capital. So we expected, actually, we thought that the household size, for example, is a big predictor. But actually, it's not the household size that's driving this prediction result. It's really education, it's occupation, and like sort of like the skills that people can carry from Syria to Lebanon that you can measure. And maybe there might be like other, you can measure, you can increase the quality of measurement of these things, especially human capital, that could increase the prediction power of this model, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
In other words, like you don't really look for.
I mean, the household size is really has its own meaning, not separately from education or occupation or the other. In this model, I don't know in Turkey, but certainly in these other countries, and there is very little collinearity between these variables. So.
Let me just add one specific response to Tuan's point, actually. So we have this result that adding type of housing is going to at least get us a bit closer to the survey-based approach, right? That is not going to do anything in a country or situation in which everyone's living in camps and standardized type of structures, for example, right? So yeah, I mean, we consider like all of this particular to the situation, but you can think of contextual factors that will either make those more important or less, for sure. Okay.
Especially after people have been there. Especially after people have been in these places for a while, you see big differences, especially in roofing, which is a good indication around poverty. So I don't agree on that point.
Okay.
Any other questions? We are over time. Last question.
Just following up on this overall conversation, to what extent you can extrapolate from what you have. I guess that to pick variables that don't vary too much over time, because we heard before that the Lebanese, they kind of move housing like 10 times in a year, or like, no, I'm exaggerating now, but I think that's what we heard. But then again, progress is only updated, like in this case, every half year. So then you might, I mean, of course you still capture something, but if there's a lot of fluidity in the variables you have, then you need to do the training very soon again. And I guess in your interest, you at least want to use it like for 2-3 years in a row, and then I guess update. So, but I guess if you use a survey that is being conducted anyway, like the Wazir, which is done every year, then of course there's synergies, and then once you have your model, you just put in the new data and it spits it out. I guess that's where you have synergies, if, since the UN collects the data anyway. And I presume that's similar in other contexts.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I remember the first time we used the home visits data, they were interviewing 5 households per month at the UNHCR, right? So we can still collect consumption data, good consumption data frequently, not necessarily 5,000 households per month. Maybe we can do it every year, and that would be more than we do on poverty. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks everyone.